Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the June meeting of Leeds Council Executive Board. I'll just start by welcoming two new members of Executive Board, Councillor Jess Lennox and Councillor Alan Lamb. Welcome to the meeting, and I'll move on to the formal items on the top of the agenda. First of all, just remind everybody in the room that this meeting is webcast live, and welcome everybody watching at home. And I will turn to the formal items. So are there any appeals against refusal of inspection of documents, please?
Thanks, Chair. There's been no appeals received for today's meeting, no.
Thank you. Are there any exempt information, please?
There's no information on the agenda, Chair, that's designated as exempt or confidential, no.
Thank you. Are there any late items?
No late items of business to consider, Chair, no.
Thank you. And I'll turn to the board. Are there any declarations of interest? I don't see any. Does everybody here accept the minutes of the meeting of the 19th of April? That's great, thank you. And I will move on to the first substantive item, which is the Leeds Safeguarding Children's Partnership Annual Report. And I welcome our partners here, Chief Superintendent Steve Dodds, Jill Marchant from the NHS, and the independent chair of the partnership, Jasvinder Sanghera. And you're welcome to this meeting. And I'll ask Councillor Fiona Venner to introduce this item, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is the annual report of the Leeds Safeguarding Children's Partnership, which is a partnership which last year Ofsted described as a strong partnership, and which Jasvinder Sanghera reiterated in her introduction to the report as our independent chair. The report outlines work over the past 2 years and learning from recent reviews. It demonstrates the learning and reflective culture of the partnership, as does the work with the national panel, which has been undertaken and which is referred to in the report. Poverty is identified as a key risk factor in terms of contextual safeguarding, and that will be discussed in more depth in the next paper that I'm bringing. And the strength of our early help offer is a protective factor. The report also really clearly outlines the very challenging context that this work is done in and highlights the complexity of the work. I know that Chief Superintendent Dodds is going to make introductory comments as well on behalf of the partnership. So I just wanted to conclude my brief comments, Chair, by referencing the fact that Jasvinder is coming to the end of her term of office as our independent chair. And I'd like to thank Jasvinder for your commitment to the children and young people of Leeds, and also to the challenge that you've brought to the partnership, which has meant that we are stronger as a partnership and in some of our processes. And I'd like to wish you luck in your next venture. So thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Chief Superintendent Dodds, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So on behalf of the LSCP exec, I just wanted to offer a few comments to open and present the annual report for you. So we are a tripartite partnership between West Yorkshire Police, the NHS and the local authority. And the report is the report of the LSCP exec, which is myself, Joe Harding from the NHS and Julie Longworth sat to my left. We are supported, as has already been mentioned by Councillor Venner, by our independent scrutineer, Jasvinder Sanghera. And I think it would be remiss of me not to just focus on Jasvinder for a second, because the LSCP are extremely grateful and indebted for the fantastic work, support and also challenge that Jasvinder has provided to us over her time in post, not only across the partnership and the fantastic work she does there, but also as well, I think, most importantly, for the work and the positioning that she's allowed us to take around supporting children and young people across Leeds. As Councillor Venner alluded to in her update, Jasvinder gave an introduction at the start of this report, talks about the evidence of the strong safeguarding system across Leeds, and references, which I think is really, really important, the openness and transparency, both of this report, but also well in the partnership that we now have in Leeds across the exec. It is our report. It's written by the business support unit and then reviewed and agreed with us all in conjunction with the Jasvinder support and scrutiny. We should recognise, as already has been referenced, but the two recent Ofsted reports and findings, particularly the recent one in 2022, that found the partnership and child safeguarding to be outstanding, but I would also refer colleagues to the HMIC FRS review of policing, which is mentioned in the report as well, and the findings of a strong supportive relationship there as well. It is really, really important within this report, and that's why it starts as such, to reference the environment of safeguarding that we work in with across the district. As you are aware, Leeds is the second largest city council in England. There has been an 8.1% increase in population over the last 10 years, which places us second for total population as a city authority across the country. 19% of the population, which is in excess of 150,000 people, are identified as living in areas that are ranked amongst the most deprived 10% areas nationally. And that's linked to findings and research that says that children from the poorest neighbourhoods in England are almost 4 times more likely to be referred to social care services. So I think the environment is really, really important. And I know you've got an item after this looking at that specifically. What's also really chilling and focusing for me is 52% of child deaths nationally occur in those 10% poorest areas. So it really does focus us in terms of the responsibility that we all hold, but certainly the responsibility that I know I share with my exec board members and colleagues. So the key learning that's come out of the report, poverty is there. I won't go over that any further. I've made the comments that bring poverty in, but I think that is a key consideration with the report that we've provided. Children in care. And we understand and we reflect that carer leavers experience poorer outcomes than their peers in other parts of society. Early health systems have already been referenced by Councillor Venner, but it's a key part of our delivery, a strong part of our delivery, but also somewhere that we continue to challenge and work to develop. Engaging and supporting the education sector. It's interesting that we put that in as key learning, particularly when you look at this from a national perspective, and part of the ongoing national consultation following the independent review of children's social care and safeguarding practice panel report following the death of Star Hobson and Arthur Labino Hughes. Is calling for discussion at a national level around education being more involved in child safeguarding at a local level. So we continue to work through that. Child exploitation is key. And whilst a lot of that is seen within the family environment, we've seen some really good partnership work around sharing of information, and particularly the use of the police intelligence portal, which we continue to support. And then I think the voice of the child is something that Jasvinder, as our scrutineer, always brings us back to question and challenge ourselves around, are we hearing the voice of the child? But it is absolutely important in this report. In terms of some of the bits that I would pick out from the report, just to highlight, I won't go through the local partnership arrangements that are there, but we have a strong structure and system in place there with groups to support us as an exec. Looking at child protection plans, with 611 children on child protection plans across the district now as of the March 2023. That relates to 36.8 per 10,000 of the population across the city, which is lower than the national average, which is positive, but probably still too many, we would all agree. And then if we look at the age categories of those child protection plans, the majority of those are in the age bracket of 5 to 9 and 10 to 15, with around 2/3 of those sitting in that area. When I then contrast that about the commentary and the report around the rapid reviews that are there, a significant proportion of our rapid reviews have been for children under the age of 4. So it just brings into focus some of the vulnerabilities that sit within that age group as well. Professional curiosity is a constant theme across those rapid reviews and a constant theme across the partnership. And I think there are two elements to that. One is around challenging professionals, but giving them the support and the tools to be more curious, but also as well understanding that we have the right escalation processes in place to allow managers to escalate and to have conversations at a senior level across the partnership to make sure that professionals' concerns are being fed in and understood and acted upon. We regularly have discussions across the partnership around good practice, barriers and support required to really embed professional curiosity and work across the partnership, particularly with our Safer, Stronger Communities colleagues and the Leeds Safeguarding Adult Board to ensure that there's a consistent approach around that. And that has contributed through a masterclass series that we've been part of in March of this year. The risk assessment process is something that is alluded to in the report, and it links into the different risk assessment models around the partnership and some of the confusions that maybe sometimes are seen through that. We're working to develop a workshop across multi-agencies to look at better oversight and management of RSOs. But to give you some reassurance around that, certainly from a policing point of view, my public protection officers currently supervise 65 registered sex offenders each. Of the 1,075 visits that are expected to be carried out by the police in our statutory duties, there are 16 of those that are outstanding at this moment, which is 1.4% of those. And our, as in line with national guidance, we are double crewing for most of those visits. And we're also looking at a consistent approach and application of a safeguarding approach, and through our reviews, the impact of that consistent application, of course, safeguarding processes is evident, and we believe improving outcome for children. However, it has been recognised that it's not always consistent, and it's something that we are continually pushing and promoting across the partnership so that we give a consistent level of support to children and young people at all times. So in summary, the LSCP priorities as of the back of the report are still relevant and appropriate for me. So we talk about domestic abuse and the impact of children, and we know what the impact of being a witness or involved in domestic abuse at a young age has on people going into adulthood and becoming involved as in such matters themselves as well. So that is extremely important. Vulnerable learners is something that we focus in on and work very, very closely to understand the reasons behind that, and that people are not being left vulnerable because of being either educated at home or other methods. And then exploitation, I think, is a real key for me, because exploitation, yes, it involves sexual exploitation of children, but it's also starting to develop and become more challenging around links to missing people, particularly missing young people in the care system. The influence of urban street gangs and the links to youth violence across the city. And I would challenge us all, and including yourselves as elected representatives, to question around how the city is adapting to that growing threat of exploitation, both sexually, criminally, and in other ways. The report highlights a strong, cohesive partnership. It covers a challenging period in terms of the rapid reviews that we've undertaken, the austerity that we've all had to go through, the disagreements and challenges that we've had around some of that. But I think we, as an exec, would say that we've come out of that stronger, more cohesive, and are in a really strong position at the moment. And I think all of that against the pressures and demands that are on all three of the core agencies that are involved in that: policing, the local authority, and the NHS. We maintain our collegiate approach and never look at reduction in resources as a means of taking away the focus, the professionalism, and the degree to which we want to support and help young people across the city. It's a strong partnership. It's developed significantly over the last 12 months. And I think the important thing, and I think where the real strength in our partnership comes from, is we identify learning in everything that we do. And we strongly focus on that learning and develop and feed that back in. That supportive nature of that partnership, although there's challenge there, we work across that partnership, is why I think the heart of what we do is really, really strong. We never sit on our laurels. We never take that as saying that we are perfect in terms of every aspect of business we do. We're always looking for improvements and challenge and learning. But I present the report to you.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Are there any other members of the board or anybody who wants to come in on this report, please? Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And before that, can I just clarify if the partnership members and the independent chair are going to be invited to stay and contribute to the next two items?
They're more than welcome to.
Thank you. I think that would be very helpful. So I'd certainly welcome that. So firstly, if I can add my thanks to all of the partners for the work that they do, and particularly to Jasvinder, who I think has really exemplified what we need in an independent chair and has highlighted the value of having an independent chair. And I note there's a strong commitment to retain that position. And I hope we stick to that, and we'll get someone who equally has absolutely the interest of children and young people at heart, and is not afraid to make appropriate challenge. And I think that's really strengthened the partnership and has brought strength to the council, and young people are safer as a result of that challenge. So I really thank Jasvinder for that. It won't surprise you, I've got quite a strong interest in this, having been scrutiny chair for the last 5 years. So I've got a number of questions first, if I may. So I'll go one at a time, if that's okay, rather than a scattergun. So the first is around the learning that was referred to. There's a lot of in the report about how we're learning, which is good. What I'm interested to hear is actually how is that learning being implemented in practice?
Yes, sure. Thank you. I think it's really important to say that across the individual organisations, there is a responsibility for performance management and quality assurance, and to have those frameworks in place. We have what's called a Section 11 process, which is almost like an audit tool, which is used right across the partnership, so right across schools and other organisations, voluntary sector organisations across the city. And part of that process is really requiring the whole of the partnership to evidence how they have taken learning on board and how they continue to ensure that they have quality assurance and performance management frameworks in place that support that. In addition, I think we are very, very clear as an executive board, our responsibility, and our responsibility is to ensure that there are effective safeguarding arrangements in place across the city for children and young people. And key to that, again, is quality assurance, performance management mechanisms. For every review that we have, so we have the review advisory group that is made up of colleagues, senior colleagues from health, from police and from children's social care. And for every review that we have had, whether that has been a review that's resulted from a notification, or indeed whether that's been a review that we have decided to take locally, there is an action plan. It's a cross-party action plan, so there could be actions for a number of organisations, and that is reviewed regularly, both by the Review Advisory Group, by the exec, but also, and I think it's really important, by the Children and Young People's Partnership. So underneath the LSCP exec, we have a real broad Children and Young People's Partnership, and we have ensured that we've taken the learning from a multitude of reviews into that partnership, but also that we've taken the progress in terms of the actions falling out of the learning to that partnership. As Steve has said, it's never an area that we can be complacent in. And I would also like to thank Jasvinder for bringing her challenge into this sphere. It's an area that Jasvinder has, again, really championed and challenged us as an exec and us as a partnership as part of her forward in the annual report. So it's an area that we continue to look at. Again, it is an area which was highlighted and commented on in our ILAC last year as a strength, but we will not sit on our laurels, and we can't afford to, Councillor Lamb. So again, it's a real, it's a constant area for us. We have multi-agency audits as an example. So we have something in the city called our Joint Targeted Area Inspection Group. Again, that's a multi-agency group. They meet, they have themed audits. So they have audits in relation to child exploitation, criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, a range of thematic issues which we feel require a specific focus from the partnership. We have a weekly meeting at the front door, which again is multi-agency. So that looks at all of the work that's come through the children's social care front door in the previous week. Again, as I've said, that group is a multi-agency group, and they regularly undertake multi-agency audits. So there's a range of work going on in individual organisations across the partnership, work going on that's driven by the exec and by the independent scrutineer, but there's always more to do.
Thank you. I'll take Steve and then Jasvinder, please. Steve, please.
Yes, thank you. And a really important question. I mean, I'd refer you to pages 11 and 12 in the report, which talks about our learning and development subgroup, and gives some idea of some of the core training and the maintenance of that training and development that we've maintained even over the challenge of the COVID period. But equally as well, we are always looking at ways to adapt and strengthen our partnership response in relation to the things that we uncover and work through, and the lessons that we learn. A real prime example of that, and I refer back to the comments I made around exploitation when I was presenting this report, is as the environment around exploitation changes, one of the things that we've put in very recent weeks is a joint funded role between the police and the local authority to place a sergeant in a similar way to what we do at the moment for domestic abuse with our review through the MASH process. But we've done that now from a youth violence point of view, and are bringing in on a daily basis a review of all violent incidents over a 24-hour period. And rather than, as the focus may have been in previous years around the perpetrators, or looking at it from a perpetrator point of view, looking at those involved, so other siblings in the house, what the arrangements around the family group are, and using our colleagues across the partnership to get the right interventions and support into those families. And that's just one example of the way in which we use that learning and move on.
Thank you, Steve. Jasvinder, please.
Thank you. I'll answer that question, but then would it be helpful if I also gave you an appraisal of myself from this report as your independent scrutineer?
Please.
That'd be helpful.
Please.
Thank you. Okay. So absolutely, we do have a learning and development subgroup. The partnership has 7 subgroups, and they're referenced in the report, one of which is the learning and development subgroup, which has met 6 times since April 2021. I do believe the partnership has a strong system of gathering learning. Absolutely. When there is a serious incident, when there is learning, that is happening in terms of the review. However, there is still a need to ensure the dissemination of that learning, and that it is clearly monitored for impact in terms of evidence of change. You know, what has changed as a result of that learning? And I think there is still more work to do around that, and the executive accept that, you know, because that conversation needs to happen. So if I may, thank you all for your comments in relation to myself. I'm not gone yet, but I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your approaches as well in being willing to listen. You know, that is an indicator of a strong partnership, the fact that you can have those open, challenging, transparent conversations. So my role in relation to being your scrutineer is to provide an independent opinion of the report, to be clear in terms of where I believe there are areas for improvements, and also what has worked well. So if I may just go down the report, the key messages from my perspective are that schools have got to remain fully engaged across the safeguarding system, that, you know, it's got to consistently inform the partnership. Schools have been a huge resource for the partnership. I've seen that when I led the domestic abuse review. We do have an education reference group, which hasn't met for a year. And we need to ensure that yourselves, as all the people around this table in the partnership, support the partnership to try and get education involved in that group. There's been a challenge in terms of getting people from education around that table. So, you know, we do need to ensure that that is maintained, and the partnership may want to think about the executive board and the Children and Young People's Partnership in terms of representation from education. Because ordinarily what we would do is we would have the subgroups who feed into the Children and Young People's Partnership to provide an update. So I would say that in terms of the subgroups, the 7 subgroups, there is some work to be done around the meeting of those subgroups and the reporting into the executive and into the broader partnership. Having said that, the executive board recognised that the current priorities have been in place since 2018, and that they've agreed to renew the priorities now to ensure they're fit for purpose and to reset this space. So that is really important to say that that conversation is happening, and that will also take place with respect to data and intelligence and what approach you're going to have towards that, because they recognise there's a time to have this conversation in terms of the implementation and the evidence of impact. So that is actually happening right now, and I'm in the process of meeting all the subgroup chairs to have a conversation in terms of moving forward. Just to reiterate what Stephen has said here in terms of care leavers, again, we're finding that, you know, care leavers is a conversation where the performance management subgroup has a key role to ensure that opportunities for shared learning improvement around that is happening. Let me just go down. So with regards to the actual process of learning. Now, I came to scrutiny in September 2021 to say that I was not assured about the notification systems and processes. Things have improved in that space without a doubt. You know, partners are now contributing. Partners are having equal and fair conversations in that space. We have to also be mindful of the fact that a city the size of Leeds is going to have more notifications. You know, we've moved on from having very few to seeing more. And that's important because, you know, we've got to learn from serious incidences. And I would say that there is a need to ensure that we keep an eye on that, to ensure that partners feel able to escalate into the system and they are confident to do that. We had a recent biannual meeting in March of our partners. Third sector and education were still saying that they want to understand more how to escalate and how to do that. And we are developing that conversation as well. So hearing from the third sector as a partner is very significant. I also read all the national panel feedback from all the notifications that have taken place in this city, of which I understand are 6 in the last year. I think, yeah, Phil's nodding at me. And in terms of the panel feedback, what national panel will do is they will give you feedback and say, give you advice and guidance and help you to have reflective practice, basically. the key areas that I've noted that national panel have been consistent on is the need to ensure that we consider as a partnership the assessment of children from minority groups, that ethnicity is a vulnerable factor, and that we need to consider that as part of assessment as a risk factor. So that is something in terms of, is ethnicity missing from analysis? You know, how are we hearing the experience of minority groups? And also the missed opportunities and the need to be absolutely aware of children who are educated at home. That is a vulnerable factor. That's how we have that conversation across the partnership. You know, should we be thinking of that as a vulnerable factor? But there is a need to do more work in that space. I suppose in terms of your question on learning, you know, from my perspective, we do have a learning development subgroup. We do need to be sure that when an incident is happening that is serious, that we're disseminating that learning at that point, and the partnership is assured that that learning has been followed up and that we are getting some feedback, maybe to the business support unit, that things are changing on the ground as a result of that. So there's that immediate stuff that goes on. In terms of action plans, which Julie referred to, yes, we do have an action plan. It goes back to ensuring, and maybe again, the business unit have a role for this. Sorry, I keep looking at you, Phil, to collate the data in relation to the changes that have happened, and where there haven't been changes, to challenge that and to follow that up. That's what I would say. I'm absolutely sure about the process of reviews, but the learning bit, I think, needs to be strengthened, should I say. And I think that's it really from my perspective. You know, I'm really heartened at the way the executive board work, and the Children and Young People's Partnership is one that is joined with the Children and Families Trust Board. We're having a conversation at the moment to ensure that safeguarding doesn't get diluted in that conversation. So we're thinking about how can we have an equal agenda in that space, and how, you know, you don't want it to be a talking shop, you want it to be really engaging with the partners. So that conversation is happening. And I thank you all for my time here in Leeds. I'm not going anywhere yet, but it has been really worthwhile. And I really thank you for inviting me into this role and being open to being challenged.
Thank you, Jasvinder. And of course, I recognise what you said about still being here for a while, but Councillor Lamb did ask about what happens next. I don't know if Julie or Councillor Venner wants to pick that point up, please. I don't want to lose that one.
Yeah.
Councillor Venner, please.
I wanted to add to what Jasvinder said about the third sector, actually, particularly because Jasvinder and I were both charity chief executives before being in our current roles. So that's where my roots are, is in the third sector as well as Jasvinder's. I think we recognise within the safeguarding partnership that a huge amount of safeguarding work happens in the third sector, probably more than anywhere else, actually, not least because the third sector not having statutory power means that sometimes people feel more able to approach, you know, community-based grassroots third sector organisations when they're in extreme difficulties. And I would say that's particularly the case for people from some minority groups. And I'm saying that having set up services in my last role, you know, in BAME communities, in the LGBT community, and for deaf people. Sometimes it's easier for small third sector organisations to reach into communities that might struggle to engage with the council or with the NHS or with the police. So our partnership with the third sector is really, really important. My successor at Leeds Survival Aid Crisis Service chairs the third sector subgroup of the partnership. So recognising that such a huge amount of work happens in the third sector around safeguarding, that's why the escalation process that Jasvinder talked about is so important, and we've discussed it more than once in the biannual meetings and in the children's partnership, because it's really important that people on the front line doing work around safeguarding know how to escalate concerns. So I just wanted to reassure Exec Board that the work of the third sector is really recognised, and they're an essential part of the partnership and have a really key role in those meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Julie, please.
Yeah, so just to absolutely confirm that we are committed as a partnership, as an exec board, to maintaining the role of independent scrutineer, and actually that process to recruit our new scrutineer is underway. I think it's really important to say as well that the exec board have engaged really well, really effectively with the 3 national safeguarding facilitators. So there is a national safeguarding facilitator for health, for police and for children's social care. They do a lot of work with the National Safeguarding Panel, and clearly, you know, the advantage that they have is they're working with local authorities right across the country. So in terms of best practice, in terms of, you know, the role of an independent scrutineer, they've been absolutely invaluable in sharing their views with us, which has helped us develop our own views for that role. Equally, Jasvinder's experience, you know, of being in that role, and you know, the views that Jasvinder have shared with the exec have also influenced and continue to influence that process. And I suppose just following on from the comments there about the third sector and the partnership, we are absolutely committed, as we were previously, to ensuring that the partnership has a role in the recruitment process as well as the exec board, you know, because we work on behalf of the citywide partnership.
Thank you. Jasvinder, please.
Just wanted to come in just to say that working together is going to be rewritten this year, and working together 2018, the document that we all worked to. And I was told by National Panel yesterday that it's imminent, it should be in a few weeks. And one of the conversations that we have influenced as part of working together is that whole space around serious harm, the definition. When is something more serious as opposed to significant harm? That is going to be in consideration, but also the whole space of notifications and the fact that you know, the conversation around the 3 partners should be an equal conversation that informs whether to notify or not. So this is a real opportunity to consult, and that will be coming out in the next 4 weeks, I'm told. So we should all make a contribution to that. On the third sector, the last biannual meeting in terms of escalation and monitoring, holding a lot of risk in the third sector, that is a real conversation, I think, in relation to the model that you have here in Leeds. Is you do not have a threshold. You assess risk by conversations, and I understand that in terms of social care. It may be time to review that model, to test it, to see how effectively that is working with partners. That is just my view in terms of hearing this space and where people are talking about risk and the understanding of risk. Risk may feel very different to the third sector to social care and vice versa. So I think that model you have currently, it's time possibly to review that. It's just my view.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for those responses, which are really helpful and appreciated. I've got 5 more points. I'll make them all, and then to keep things moving. My comments on notifications, I'll say for item 8. So just touching, Jasvinder mentioned the working groups, one of which that hasn't met for 12 months. I'd be grateful if someone could just explain if that's a similar position with all the working groups, or what the position is there. Equally, a bit more comment on the priority setting. Obviously, the world has changed significantly since 2018 with the pandemic, cost of living, etc. So just be useful for understanding of what the timeline and expectation is for setting those priorities going forward. I'd be grateful for a bit more comment about the issue of children being educated at home. It is an issue scrutiny has looked at in detail, but I think it is an area of concern for a lot of people. It can be a positive thing for a lot of children and families, but it is a concern about how we make sure children are properly safeguarded in that situation. One of the strengths, I think, of the last 12 months is the better relationship between the council scrutiny and the LSCP, and I'd just be grateful for some comment on the partners if that's something they're keen to see continue and strengthen. I think we don't want to duplicate work, but it's been of great value to have more involvement and more communication between the two. And then my final point is coming back to my first question. Again, I think it's worth remembering we're talking about the most serious cases when we're talking about learning. It's where there have been child death, significant harm, serious harm, the learning is key, and it's key that it's implemented quickly. And so I'd just like to hear what assurances we can be given that we are doing everything possible, or what more we are going to do to make sure when we are learning lessons and we know when those cases happen, we'll say that should never be able to happen again. What do we do immediately to make sure that learning is implemented straight away at the front line?
Thank you. Who'd like to come in? Julie, please.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I'll do my best to respond to most of them to one degree or another. I think in relation to the subgroups, I think it's right and proper to acknowledge that we are still really feeling the impact of the pandemic. And whilst I suppose the core of the pandemic might feel, quite a while ago, actually the impact in terms of our partner organisations is still being felt in terms of demand, complexity of demand, recruitment and retention issues, capacity issues. So I think we need to acknowledge that, and I think we have acknowledged that. Jasvinder's touched on the fact that as an exec board, we have been reviewing some of our governance arrangements. So as an example, we have just agreed that I will chair going forward, a number of groups that perhaps, and the exec board members also becoming more involved, if you like, with some of the partnership work, which I think is a recognition really of our commitment to wanting to be visible leaders within that broader partnership. As part of that work, we have looked at the subgroups, and that's the work that Jasvinder has described, in as much as she will be meeting with the chairs of those subgroups in order for us to review that whole process. I think the point that Jasvinder makes about education, and again, that is something that featured in the independent review of children's social care as to whether education ought to be, a formal statutory member of exec boards going forward. So these are live conversations that we are having as a partnership and with Jasvinder. In relation to the priorities, again, that's an ongoing piece of work. It's an absolute priority for us. We want to do that in consultation with the partnership. So we will be looking, I think, to think about actually, OBA events, with our success in Leeds has been around that outcome-focused, outcome-based accountability, and actually how we involve our partners in those discussions. So I think that's an absolute priority for us this year, to review the themes, to review the emerging issues, some of which Steve has described in terms of serious youth violence, risk outside the home. But we want to do that in a collaborative way, and sometimes that takes a bit longer, but I think it's really, really important that we do that so that we then have ownership across the partnership. In terms of children being educated at home, we know nationally that there has been an increase of children who are being electively home educated. Whilst we have seen an increase in Leeds, actually we still remain relatively low in terms of the numbers of children that we do have electively home educated in comparison to other local authorities. And I think that's no small feat, again, given the size of the city and the demands that we have. As you've said, I think it's important for us to recognise parents' carers' right to home educate their children. That is their right. And, there's something about how we as a local authority and as a partnership support parents to enact their right, and so we have been meeting with parents right across the city who are currently electively home educating their children to talk about what's the offer, as a local authority, but also as a partnership. What is it that we can offer that would support them in that role? Equally, we also know that school is a protective factor, so we need to balance, again, I suppose having been mindful of the numbers of electively home educated, but I think we need to come from a position of support in terms of how we support those families and how we assure ourselves that the level of education, that the quality of the education that's being provided is that which is going to support children and young people to really fulfil their potential. So again, a lot of focus on that, both within the local authority, but also across the partnership. In terms of learning and embedding the learning, I think we've talked about that already. I think it's a key focus area for our review advisory group. again, you know, Steve has talked about some regional work which has taken place right across Yorkshire and Humberside recently in terms of workforce development sessions around professional curiosity. So not only are we, I suppose, taking the learning from Leeds and embedding that in Leeds, we're actually sharing the learning from Leeds across the region. You know, so what I would say is we're committed to reviewing our processes, strengthening our processes, most importantly, to look at the impact. And that is something that we'll continue to do.
Thank you, Julie. Steve, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to add a couple of observations from myself and around the 5 points that Councillor Lamb made. I won't touch on the subgroups, so I think we've covered that sufficiently. In terms of priority setting, though, absolutely, as soon as we can get the chairs of those subgroups together, we are going to go through that exercise and that process of gathering their thoughts and their recommendations around priority setting, and we hope to do that before we get into the summer any further. In terms of home education, I think it's a real opportunity to support young people within this area. So I think has already been referenced, it can be quite a positive environment for some people. It can also be a real flag around potential abuse around home education as well. My Chief Inspector Partnerships, who works within the local authority, has linked in with Rebecca McCormack, who leads from a local authority point around elected home education. We're looking for opportunities. I think there are opportunities around police officers are probably in houses and engaging with families more significantly than some of our local authority colleagues, just because of the nature and the role that we do, not necessarily around child protection issues all the time, but just because of the fact that we're in houses. So how can we improve that awareness and that professional curiosity around home education, but other matters as well? In terms of the comments around the involvement and greater sort of connection between ourselves as partner agencies and scrutiny, yeah, within reason, I am more than happy to be part of that process. I'm a public official, and I should be scrutinised around the role of my organisation and the action of my officers. So I welcome that greater conversation and challenge around that. In terms of the most serious cases, I was on a national facilitated event this morning, facilitated by Lorraine Parker, who is the national facilitator for policing, that Julie alluded to in one of her answers a moment ago. Deputy Chief Constable Ian Critchley was on that call as well, and he's the National Police Chief Council's lead for child protection. He is talking around, and it links in with the consultation that's going on at central government at the moment around changing the language around child safeguarding and talking about the types of offences that we're dealing with. And that's certainly in policing somewhere we're moving to. So we are talking about the rape of children in terms of some of the cases that we're dealing with. And there's a real push on a national level to start talking in some of those terms to really highlight the seriousness of the cases that we do. So absolutely, we take those cases really, really seriously. And hopefully that just gives you some reassurance around your points.
Thank you. Tom, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add my thanks to Jasvinder in particular. I know she's not going quite yet, but really appreciate what she's brought to the city and the partnership. And it's been incredibly important for us to improve and to move forward. I just wanted to make a point about the subgroup and the meetings, that just to reassure people that we have conversations with schools every day about safeguarding issues. And we've held a number of conversations with heads about the general situation that we are dealing with. Julie's held them, and they always cover safeguarding issues as well. So it is important that we get those subgroups right, but there are also a lot of different conversations happening right across the city, and there is good connection, I think, and right across the range of schools, regardless of whether they're associated with the local authority or they're independent mats. And the other point I just wanted to make was I'm involved in the national board with the minister taking forward the review recommendations of social care and some of the lessons from the most extreme and tragic cases nationally that have been referenced. They're meeting in Leeds tomorrow, actually, and very keen to see what we're doing in the city. I guess I just wanted to make the comment that will probably lead us into the next paper, but the challenge on the front line and the demands and the pressures coming out of the pandemic, combined with cost of living, all hitting, families who are already vulnerable or who weren't vulnerable but become vulnerable, leads to a really challenging situation for our frontline staff in dealing with all of these issues. And so even more reason why, we've been out and about meeting them a lot and hearing from them, and the embedding of that learning and best practices is even more important in those circumstances. But you realise as well the judgments that they're having to make and how challenging that is. And I just wanted to thank as well Steve and Jill, who've really helped us because the police and the NHS are also dealing with those demand pressures too. And often when you look at the individual cases, they are about making sure that the practitioners from all sides are able to meet and able to make the right judgments and see the full picture. And in a demand pressured system, that's even harder. And I think so. I just wanted to, and I've just had a conversation with many of my colleagues across the country, and we've been talking about, what are the biggest pressures on councils at the moment, and this is the biggest pressure financially and in demand terms, and it's right across the country. And it's something I think the government are aware of, but it's something that I think cross-party we need to keep that conversation going, because it is really hitting everybody in a very, very serious way. So even more thanks to all of the people involved in this safeguarding work in that context.
Thank you. I'm looking to bring this item. Nobody else. Do you want to sum up, Councillor Venner, please, and then we'll move to the recommendations.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for that very rich discussion and for your questions, Councillor Lamb. I think what we've drawn out through this discussion is both some areas that we need to focus on, particularly the education subgroup, though, as Tom pointed out, we do have really, really regular contact with schools around safeguarding. I think we've also given a really clear outline of how we both embed and disseminate learning that comes from the most serious cases. So hopefully people will feel reassured that the safeguarding of children is taken with the utmost seriousness and by the partners across the safeguarding executive, and that we have a commitment to disseminating learning out to the third sector and to other organisations that are working in this arena. And we've reiterated our commitment to maintaining the independent scrutiny role going forward. And as Julie has highlighted, we're in the process of recruiting a new person for when Jasvinder does leave us. So I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all our partners for contributing to the discussion. So I'm going to move to the recommendations on page 18, and I take it everybody is happy with those recommendations. That's great. Thank you. So if we could move on to your next item, please, Councillor Venner, item 7.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a report of the child poverty strategy in Leeds, and it's a report that comes here regularly and also which goes to the scrutiny board regularly as well. And I'd like to start by referencing the figures, because it could look as though child poverty is reducing in terms of the 22% that's referenced, whereas it was 24% in previous reports for child poverty in Leeds. And these figures come from the DWP, and they've issued a caveat with their figures. I don't know why they've done this, but they collected this data in a different way to how it had been collected previously, in terms of the data is collected from a smaller sample and in a different way. So they've made the point that these figures should be looked at as a point in time and not compared to previous years, because I think it will be really, really apparent to anybody who works with children and families that there is no way that child poverty is reducing at the moment, not in Leeds, not in anywhere else in the country. There are, at the back of the report, there is an explanation of the definitions of poverty, which there are different definitions of poverty just to confuse matters, but the most commonly used definitions are a family in poverty where their income is less than 60% of the median income, and you can look at that before and after housing costs. Even if we look at that measure there of 22%, that does mean that a fifth of children in Leeds are living in poverty. And that is a really high number of children. And we think that is under what the figure will actually be. And most of those children are living in households where at least one adult is at work. And you've got intersectionality within that. So you are more likely to be a family in poverty if there's a disabled person in the family, if it's a single parent household, or if you're a family from a Black or minority ethnic group. The report goes through, as it always does, it goes through each work stream that the child poverty strategy focuses on, and it outlines some quantitative data and also some qualitative feedback so that you can see the outcomes and the impact of the work. One final point that I wanted to draw your attention to, and it's really interesting that Chief Superintendent Dodds picked up on this in the safeguarding report and described it as chilling, the direct link between child deaths and poverty. So this report references a report into child mortality for 2021, which highlights 700 deaths that are directly attributable to poverty. That means deaths with modifiable factors like co-sleeping, for example, which is more likely to happen if you don't have, if you're inadequately housed. So I think the fact that children are literally dying because of poverty is chilling, to use again Chief Superintendent Dodds's phrase. And it's just one of the many reasons why we have a moral responsibility to do this work. And I've said many times that as a council, we don't have the levers to lift people out of poverty. I wish we did. That's down to central government, and there are some incredibly cruel policies that directly impact on children. But we do have a moral responsibility to ameliorate the impact, and that's why, we have a child poverty strategy and we're not required to, why we have a board that's cross-council and involves partners outside, and why we regularly report here into scrutiny. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I welcome the report, and I don't think any one of us would underplay the impact, particularly at the moment, of the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, a succession of issues that have made things much tougher for an awful lot of people, some of whom were in incredibly challenging circumstances before that. The report is around mitigating the impacts of poverty. I support lots of it. It's been to scrutiny. We've looked at it in great detail. I suppose the challenge, which I hope is taken in the way I intend it, is actually, I think where I slightly disagree with Councillor Venner is I think there is more that the council could do to look at the root causes of poverty and tackling them. And actually, if you take out the impact of the pandemic, the cost of living crisis and other things, poverty has been stubborn in the city and the country for decades and decades and decades. It's not a political point. It was the same when my party was in administration, previously when your party was in administration, under governments of all colours going back decades. And so what I'm trying to put forward is I think it's important that we do this work to mitigate what's happening now, but in parallel, we have to start looking at actually what could we do? And where there's talk of cross-party representation to government and things that the council can do now, it should be focused on how we actually get once and for all to the root causes of poverty and lifting people out of poverty. And I think actually there is more that we can and should do as a council. So that's my comment, and welcome to, it's not a question particularly, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Councillor Venner, please.
Yeah, you won't be surprised that I want to come back on that. Child poverty is not inevitable, and it's not something that just happens to go up or down. Child poverty, and this is a political point, and I'm not going to apologise for that. Child poverty reduced hugely under the Labour government, and that wasn't a coincidence. It was things like Sure Start, working family tax credits, educational maintenance allowance. And there are some really cruel policies now, like only being able to claim child benefit for 2 children, you know, like the benefits cap, like the reduction of the £20 uplift in universal credit, which the Roundtree Foundation estimated pushed an additional 200,000 families into poverty. They are political decisions. And when I'm talking to people about why politics is important, I give that as just one example, because that shows the huge impact on people's lives that policies made at a national level have. You know, the Labour government had a target to reduce child poverty, to halve it by 2020. And the coalition government got rid of that target and made it not a requirement for councils to have a child poverty strategy at all. And I'm really proud that we still do. Yeah. So actually, it really matters what happens at a national level. If you've got suggestions for how we can ameliorate the impact of poverty better than we do, then I'm really keen to hear them, because that's all we're able to do at the moment. Is mitigate the impact, and we have a duty to do that, and that's why we have so many different people working on this in the council, out of the council, and we have so many different work streams. It's our responsibility to do that, to make sure children have school uniform, they're not hungry in holidays, they can enjoy activities that all children should be able to access. If there are ways we can do better than we are doing, then I'm really up for hearing that. But actually, to imply this is something that just happens or isn't massively impacted by national policy is wrong. And yeah, I'll leave that there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yes, you won't be surprised to know that I'd like to come back on that, because that's not what I said and isn't in the spirit of what I said. I didn't say poverty is inevitable at all. Actually, according to the Joseph Roundtree Foundation that you quoted, poverty rates have remained the same since 1994 to 1995 throughout the Labour government, throughout all governments. The point I was making is the underlying causes of poverty have been stubbornly there for decades. No government has got to this. I don't think poverty should be inevitable. I'm speaking as someone who knows what it's like, and I'm sure others around this table do, to grow up in very challenging circumstances. It is not inevitable, and it's not what I'm saying. The thing that disappoints me is you don't accept that the council, with all its budget and resources, can have an impact on lifting people out of poverty. I think it's right that we have a strategy for mitigating the effects now. Actually, I think we should have more ambition, and we should say we can. It doesn't mean we don't need the government to do more, whichever colour it is, and we shouldn't be working in partnership. But I think we should actually have that ambition and see it as our role as a council to try and lift people out of poverty and tackle the root causes once and for all. I don't think it's just down to government. I think there's more we can do. That's the point I'm making. Thank you.
Councillor Venner, please.
I don't think anyone could accuse this strategy of not being ambitious. It covers all aspects of children's lives. It covers access to green space. It covers getting people into employment, giving children the best start in life, making sure that children are in a position that they can learn at school. Again, I would reiterate, and this will be going back to scrutiny, and I really welcome the challenge from people on the scrutiny board. If there's more than we could be doing, then I'm really, really up for hearing that. But I think this is an ambitious strategy, and it has at its heart an absolute passion and determination that children in Leeds do not suffer because of poverty.
Thank you, Councillor Venner and Councillor Lamb. I don't see anybody else wanting to come in on this one, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 68 and see if the board accepts those recommendations. That's great. And we'll move on to item 8, please, Councillor Venner.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the report I committed to bring to Executive Board at March's full council meeting. It's a response to the Conservative White Paper, which was passed unanimously at that full council. This paper outlines in detail a legislative framework around people who pose a risk of sexual harm to children, the council's responsibilities and role in relation to keeping children safe from harm, and with regard to court processes. I had a meeting of opposition group leaders on the 9th of June, and this report has been amended in light of the feedback that was discussed at that meeting, keeping the report, as a cross-party report following the white paper being unanimously passed. This report is explicit that no local authority could categorically state that no child will ever live with someone who is a convicted sexual offender. And this is because it is up to courts and not the council to make rulings about where children live. And we've had a really tragic example that's been in the national news of a situation that isn't around sexual offending, but the tragic death of little Finlay Bowden, who was killed by his parents. The council in that case recommended a 4-month gradual process by which Finlay would stop being a looked after child and return to the care of his parents, because there were concerns about his parents' ability to parent and their substance misuse. The court overruled that and reduced it to 8 weeks. Now, we can't possibly know if Finlay would have lived had that process been slower, but it's a really horrible, powerful example of where courts are able to overrule the recommendation of social workers and, of the council. This report recommends a cross-party letter to the newly formed ministerial group, cross-party ministerial group, child protection ministerial group, to request a review of both legislation and statutory guidance in this area. And in that letter, we would want to request a particular emphasis on the voice of the child and their right to information about their circumstances. And that is directly from learning from cases in Leeds. And that recommendation has been strengthened after the meeting on the 9th of June, the cross-party meeting, to refer to the fact that currently different organisations have different risk assessment tools to assess different things. That's part of the challenge. A more unified approach would be helpful. So that's something we'd want that group to look at. In line with the white paper recommendation, the report also refers to the importance of openness and transparency, and it reiterates our commitment to continuing to have an independent scrutiny role with regard to safeguarding children. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Councillor Lamb, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I was hoping that the partners were going to stay for this, actually, but I'll ask my questions anyway, and hopefully between Julie and Councillor Venner, they can cover the answers. So the first point for me is, obviously, I hope Councillor Venner will accept that the way this came to the attention of opposition members and scrutiny was not right, and that lessons have been learned from that. And there was a considerable amount of time from the independent chair raising concerns about not being assured about the process of notifications, and opposition members and councillors and even the members of the administration being made aware of that concern. So I'd just be grateful for an assurance that we have learned that lesson, and that in similar circumstances, hopefully there won't be any, but we would bring that forward and make sure everybody's engaged in the process at an early point. My next question is around who is making referrals to the review advisory group now. My understanding is the majority are coming from police partners and health partners. And one of the concerns I have is that, do colleagues in social care feel comfortable and confident, as was alluded to in the previous paper, about how to escalate their concerns, and that they're then taken seriously and they find their way to the review advisory group? And then finally, I understand there have only been 6 notifications in Leeds since April 2022, and I'd be grateful to understand if that's typical, if that's what we'd expect to see in a city the size of Leeds, and what's behind that number.
Thank you. Julie, would you like to come in first, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think in relation to the first point, Councillor Lamb, that you made, I would absolutely completely want to assure you that in terms of transparency openness, learning, if you like, from previous situations and cases in the city, as has been described, as is reflected in the LSCP annual report. There's been an awful lot of learning. I myself have ensured that we have processes in place which enable us to have conversations with significant individuals within the local authority and within the partners, to have conversations at the earliest opportunity. And I think I've evidenced that in recent months and recent weeks, that those processes are in place and that they are effective. I think, as has been described both by Jasvinder and by Steve today, the partnership is in a strong place, you know, as was recognised by the ILAC last year. That's not to say that any of us are about to sit on our laurels. You know, we are committed to a culture of continuous improvement, a culture of learning, a culture of openness, and a culture of transparency. And I can absolutely assure you, with, you know, all integrity, that that is in place across the executive and across the partnership. Again, in terms of the notification process, you know, we do receive regular feedback from the National Safeguarding Panel. At no time have they expressed a concern, nor was it you know, expressed as a concern when we had the ILAC inspection last year, that there's, you know, like a confidence, if you like, in the number of notifications that are being made by Leeds. I think, as Jasvinder has referenced in the earlier discussion on the earlier paper, we have seen a rise in notifications from Leeds. And again, it's an area that we continue to monitor, we benchmark, we look at other core cities, we look at information from the region. So it's something that we're very mindful of, and it's something that we have, I suppose, that professional curiosity as an executive board. In terms of the review advisory group and referrals to the review advisory group, you know, absolutely, there are referrals from the range, the broad range of partnership. And I certainly experienced that myself when I was a member of the review advisory group. We've done a lot of work, both in the partnership, but in the local authority, around the escalation process. I think what's more important in some ways, or as important to me and to the exec board, is, I suppose, I think there's something that comes before a professional or an individual wanting to feel that they're in a position to perhaps formally escalate. So, you know, if we're thinking about that real timely identification of need, there's something about how we support our practitioners right across the partnership, but within the Children and Families Directorate, to act on their intuition. So to act on when they have a niggle, when something does not feel quite right, you know, so we don't really want people to be waiting until the point that they've got a major concern. So again, if we're thinking about early intervention and prevention, if we're thinking about best practice, what we're doing and what we continue to do is to support colleagues at every level of the directorate to act on that professional experience, that professional niggle, you know, their knowledge, their judgment, to have those conversations in supervision, to have those conversations. We have reflective forums where colleagues come together within the directorate, but also with other partners from other agencies. So I think there's something about, you know, in order to avoid concern, in order, you know, we don't want things getting to that level. It's about enabling people, empowering people to come forward at the earliest point when they are feeling that something's not quite right. Clearly, we do have the formal escalation process. There's a need for the formal escalation process, and we've done a lot of work, both within the local authority, but also the partnership has already been described, about creating awareness of that. There's one thing about partners being aware, colleagues being aware. There's the other bit for me, which is about empowering, encouraging, creating a culture where not only is it is a permission to share, you know, concerns, but actually there's an expectation that if you are feeling uncomfortable, if you have a concern, that you raise that at the earliest opportunity, because that is about safe practice. That is about a culture of openness and safety. And that is what we're about in Leeds.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Venner, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point on the issue around openness and transparency, because one of the things this paper was asked to do was to address that and to reiterate our commitment to openness and transparency. I just wanted to draw your attention on page 129. There's a reference to the Rotherham inquiry and the question about whether in that inquiry, whether absolute transparency should take precedence over protecting the confidential details of children. And the inquiry found that the guiding principle on reductions in serious case reviews must be the welfare of any children involved as paramount. So I just wanted to add that caveat that we've put that in the paper, that this council is absolutely committed to openness and transparency, subject to the principle that the welfare of children is paramount. Having said that, Julie has absolutely committed, as you'll be aware, to briefing opposition, the relevant opposition members. And the fact that that has been happening was positively referenced by one of them at the meeting on the 9th of June, who was expressing, thanking Julie for proactively doing that. So I just wanted to make that caveat, but say we are committed to making sure opposition members are appropriately briefed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you. No, and I would reaffirm that actually Julie has been incredibly open. I just felt and feel it's important in this forum that it's confirmed that that's the position, that it is the principle of this council that we will I accept you have to respect confidentiality, and I hope we've also demonstrated as opposition members that when that's been asked of us, we've respected that absolutely without question. But that gives the public the confidence that, because we don't know what we don't know, and we have to have absolute confidence that where there's a challenging situation, it's going to be shared with us, and we can give reassurance to the public that there is openness. It's not always appropriate for these conversations to happen in public for obvious reasons, but we need to give everyone the confidence that we're on it. There isn't another Rotherham waiting to happen here in Leeds. I don't believe there is, but we need to be able to give that reassurance constantly. Couple of further questions. So one of the issues around this was when there's a disagreement between the partners. The legal position is clear. The duty sits with the local authority to make the notification, but my view is the custom and practice should be that if two partners agree there should be a notification, we should notify, regardless of the view, if the local authority have a different view. And I'd like an assurance that that's a representation we'll be making to the national panel review, that should be the position. I know we've had advice that that's not currently the position, but it's being reviewed now. My view is that should be the case. If two partners feel there should be a notification, the local authority shouldn't have a veto. The standard, we could take that as a custom and practice now if we wanted. It's my understanding legally, but regardless of that, if we disagree, we could make that representation that if two partners feel there should be a notification, that should be our representation.
Thank you, Julie. I think there's 2 points from Councillor Lamb there, so I wonder if you'd like to pick those up, please.
I think some of our legal colleagues might want to come in as well, just in terms of the current legal position and what we can and what we can't do. What I would say is in the last 12 months, I think 18 months, we have not had a situation yet where there's not been a consensus across the three key statutory partners in terms of notification. And I think actually that evidences the learning that has taken place in recent times. And it also evidences, the strength of the partnership, really. So I don't, I think that will continue. I'm absolutely confident that will continue, and that consensus, if you like, and that effective partnership working. However, currently the law is the law, and we need to act within the law. And perhaps legal colleagues may want to come in.
Yes, please. Rebecca, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's Rebecca Roberts, legal officer, and I'm also the legal advisor to the LSCP. And the legal framework that sits around the notification process was mentioned in the LSCP's annual report as well. And it is within the legal framework that when a notification is made, that notification is the duty of the local authority. It is their decision to make. And that legal framework has recently been strengthened by new guidance that's been issued by the national panel, confirming that it is right and correct that that duty rests with the local authority. But that's not to say that, of course, the LSCP can't not contribute towards that decision making, which is currently what is happening at the moment.
Thank you. Julie, please.
I perhaps just wanted to give you one example of I think where the learning has been taken forward, and also the partnership discussions in the partnership process has become richer. So as an example, in the review advisory group, once we've made a notification, we have to we enter into what's called a rapid review process, and that leads to the review advisory group meeting. Before that, every organisation who's been involved with a child over a particular timescale has to complete a scoping exercise. So that's quite a detailed document of their involvement with the child, with the family. And as part of that, they will identify where they feel that there's been areas of good practice, strong practice in their involvement, but also where there's perhaps been areas where they could have done things differently, where they feel they should have done things differently. What we've now done as part of this whole learning is when we have the review advisory group, we actually invite the authors of those scoping documents to attend the review advisory group for that discussion. So it may be that we have head teachers, we have SENCOs, we have health visitors, we have police colleagues, and they contribute to that discussion. Because I think one of the points which was raised earlier in the meeting was the point, you know, the absolute urgency to get learning in as timely a way as possible. And what we've found through this new process is that the richness of those discussions in terms of pulling those authors together and the ability then to identify learning in as timely a way as possible. So we take that learning immediately from that RAG group discussion, and we are implementing that both in individual organisations and across the partnerships. I suppose just to reflect, I think that's an example of where the views of the partnership, you know, the voluntary sector are absolutely instrumental in identifying the learning, sharing the learning and embedding the learning. And that's not something that we had in place before. I just think that's a good example of perhaps how things have moved on.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you. The specific question which hasn't been answered is, what is our representation going to be to the national panel review? My view is there should be a change, as is advocated by all the other partners and the independent chair, that when there is disagreement, if two partners think there should be a notification, there should be a notification. It shouldn't be for the local authority or whoever is ultimately has the duty to notify. Do you agree with that? And just as a slight follow-up to the previous question, could you provide the figures of how many referrals there've been and from where they've come from? I know you won't be able to give us that now, but by way of a follow-up, please.
Thank you. Julie, please.
I think this is a really, I think, as has been borne out by the conversation that we're having today and the conversations that have been had previously, and the conversations that are still being had at a national level, you know, and the reason for the consultation. I think it's a very, very complex area. You know, there's been a lot of learning in Leeds. One of the reasons, actually, which we now have, we have this current process where, you know, in working together, there was a change, which gave the ultimate responsibility to the Director of Children's Services to make the decision in terms of notifications, was because in previous arrangements where actually there was a shared shared responsibility, actually that proved very, very difficult, because there were times when actually you know, it wasn't possible. So I don't think there's necessarily any easy answers to this, which again, as I've said, I think is borne out by the fact that we've had a change in arrangements only back in 2019, and we're yet again now in a consultation. And I think that evidences the complexity of it. I wouldn't want to be drawn today in terms of that particular question, Councillor Lamb, because I think it does require ongoing reflection. I think it does require ongoing discussion within the directorate. And as I've said, I have taken advice, I have taken conversations with the National Safeguarding Facilitator and the National Panel, who themselves, I think, would say that it's not an exact science. And I think the safest thing really in terms of decision making is to ensure, which is what we've done in Leeds, which is that it is transparent, it is clear. Partners do feel that they are being listened to and that they are absolutely able to inform the decisions that are made. And as I've said, we've not had a situation where we've not been able to reach an agreement. And I think that's where the focus should be in terms of the partnership being effective in being able to work through some of the complexities that we've discussed today.
Councillor Venner, do you want to sum up and then we'll bring this item to a close, please?
I'll just say a couple of sentences really, which I think the report highlights the just huge amount of learning that's happened as a result of discussions in various forums and serious cases from the last couple of years. And I think the report highlights the learning that's happened and the way in which the partnership has been strengthened. I think the only other comment I'd want to make is just to thank people from across the chamber for their input into this report. I've not had the experience before on exec board of having cross-party input to an exec board report, and it's felt like a collaborative process. Councillor Blackburn, who's observing, actually spoke to me on his holiday because he couldn't come to the meeting, which I think kind of demonstrates really the commitment that people have had to getting to this point. So I'd like to thank everyone, and especially Julie and the legal team. It's a very legalistic paper, as you will have experienced. So thank you all for your expertise in helping us get to this point where one of the recommendations is a cross-party letter to the ministerial group, and that will be our next task to work on that, with members from across the chamber. So thank you all.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 115, and I see the board in agreement with those recommendations. So we'll move on to, thank you, Councillor Venner, and we'll move on to Councillor Pryor's portfolio, please, in item 9.
Thank you, Leader. So this is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, years 2 and 3. As Exec Board knows, UK SPF is the fund that replaced the EU structural and investment funds, albeit much smaller. So back in October, Exec Board authorised procurement and spend for year 1, and this report will take us up to year 3. Years 2 and 3 will be delivering our priorities on the cost of living, community infrastructure, culture, heritage and engagement, and also supporting innovation and business. These will be delivered through a mixture of council teams, procurement, commissioning and grant awards. I shall leave it there for opening remarks.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, do you want to come in?
I've had a thorough briefing on this one, so I'll take a breather on this paper.
Okay. I'll move to the recommendation on page 135, and the board accepts those recommendations. So onto your second paper, please, Councillor Pryor.
Thank you, Leader. So Exec Board decided last year to review the Council's investment in our independent cultural sector. This report summarises the findings of this review and makes recommendations again for the next 3 years. Increasingly, we're seeing our cultural sector is absolutely essential to Leeds' economy, and culture is a key driver of growth. This sector not only delivers more than 850 jobs and creates work for more than 2,300 freelance workers, but also brings in a host of benefits in health and well-being, community cohesion, and more on top of those economic benefits. Through this refreshed investment programme, we'll continue to offer a range of support, including grants to support one-off projects, as well as longer programmes and core running costs for a number of organisations. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, are you happy with this, Councillor Lamb?
Well, it wasn't much of a breather, but I didn't want to let Councillor Pryor off the hook too easily. So I'd just like to focus on the references to Leeds 2023 in this, and you'll be familiar with our position that we were in favour of continuing with the Year of Culture. We disagree on the amount of money that's been spent. We think that it could have been delivered at significantly less cost to the taxpayer, but we are where we are. The report says it is expected that Leeds 2023 will let culture loose across all areas of the city. Given we're now halfway through 2023, I think a lot of people in the city would be hard pressed to say they'd agree that culture has been let loose so far in all parts. I accept there are many events still to come. The concern is that actually it's going to end up being a bit of a damp squib. And I think from this point, we'd hope for the reputation of the city that you can assure us that actually we are going to look back at the end of 2023 and feel that all parts of the city did benefit from this year of culture. It doesn't feel like that at the minute. So perhaps you could give us some assurances on that.
So first of all, what I'd say is the initial proposal of core funding from the council to fund 2023 sat at around 12 million. This was obviously pre-COVID, pre-cost of living. This was reduced twice to, I think the final core cost, I don't have it in front of me, but I think was 5.7 million from core council funding. So that's quite a significant reduction, which while something we necessarily didn't want to reduce, obviously we had to reflect the current, those economic landscapes at the time. In terms of 2023 in 23's events, I've been to a number of events myself. I've not seen you there, Councillor Lamb, but we've had the launch event. There's been a huge amount done in schools, which is going to be huge to those children who attend those schools. I don't have children myself, so I've not been to any of those, but they're still going on. They're still happening. We've obviously had the barn raising, which was a hugely successful event. We saw thousands of people attending that. We're in the middle of 33 different events, one for each ward. I think Weatherby's is in July. 1st of July, there we go. So I hope you'll be able to find your way to that one. I'm looking forward to going around a few myself. We've just launched in the city centre a new art installation, which I hope will inspire conversations and will be there for the rest of the year. And we are coming up to Children's Day as well. So there are a huge number of events which are coming up both in the city centre and across the city. Now, when we look at the economic impact of 2023, we know that initial 5.7 million investment from core council funding has actually brought in more money to Leeds, whether that's through the Arts Council, whether that's through National Lottery Heritage Fund. Business rates have been spent on it. So it means more money has been spent in Leeds than would have been here had we not gone forward with 2023. So that is a clear economic benefit. Whatever people think of an artistic side, and art is always going to be attract different opinions. I don't think it should be up to us as politicians to say what art or art isn't, but it's undoubtable that that money has come into Leeds. It's been disappointing that when we've approached the government to ask them to fund any of our year of culture, they've turned us down and they haven't given us any money there. So Leeds is going to have to grow our economy by ourselves without that government support. So I have every faith that this will continue to boost our economy, and we've still got half the year to go.
Great. So I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 155, and I take it the board accept those recommendations. So we'll move on to the paper under my portfolio, please, which is the organisational plan for 2023 onwards being our best paper. This is something that sits alongside our best city ambition, which is a document the work we do reaching out to all our partners and communities in the city. This is a bit that works how we will work as a council. We've used feedback from our peer review last year around areas where we need to work, particularly with our workforce and supporting our managers within the workforce to take the council's agenda forward. So I won't say a lot more than that on introduction. I don't know if Mariana wants to add anything at this page. No, not at all. So I will see if Councillor Lamb wants to make any comments on this, please.
Yeah, you'd be disappointed if I didn't. One question and then, well, no, two separate questions. First one, probably for Mariana. I don't know if you can give us an update on how many or what percentage of time is still spent working from home, and if we've done any measuring on how that's impacted productivity.
I can't give you an exact figure in terms of colleagues working at home. We do have occupancy figures, so I can certainly take it away and try and provide you with some information. And I can probably give you some information from the staff survey that might help in terms of productivity.
And then
Thank you.
and then my second question, completely unrelated, maybe a little tenuous, but I was struggling to find where I could raise it on this. But I'd like to ask Councillor Hayden about the changes to the planning portal on the subject of being our best. And regardless of whether you think it's a good idea to stop having public, public comments not being visible on the planning portal, would you agree with me that on the spirit of being our best, implementing them with no notice, only consulting Labour chairs of plans panels, and just introducing it is not an acceptable way to be our best, and a commitment that perhaps now we can work across party to look at whether this is the best way to achieve the suggested objective and maintain openness and transparency?
Councillor Hayden, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not sure what the question was.
You're familiar with the changes to the planning portal? Yes. So, well, there's two questions. One, do you think it's a good idea? I don't. Two, do you think it's right that it was introduced with no notice, no notification, no consultation with opposition members, no consultation with the public, with parish councils, all the many people that are interested? There's two parts. One, do you think it's a good idea? Two, would you accept it should have been done in a much better way?
Right. First question, which do I think it's a good idea? I wish it was something that we didn't have to do. I wish we had enough financing to employ planning officers to monitor the planning portal so that any abusive and inappropriate comments could be removed, and that we could employ people to do that. Instead, they need to be working on planning applications. We don't have enough financing. We don't have enough funding in able to properly police the planning portal. I would love to have kept it as it was, but financing was an issue. There was also the issue of people using it inappropriately and it causing a great deal of distress and harm to other people, and also putting people off contributing to the planning objection process because they were afraid of actually their objection or their support being viewed by other people and therefore being criticised and sometimes being abused. So I wish it was something that we didn't have to take. It's once you have something in place, people don't like it if you have to change it. And it's not something that we did lightly. In terms of the way it was done, the chief officer went through the scrutiny with the scrutiny board. I'm sorry, but it was reported in the Yorkshire Evening Post exactly what the chief officer said at scrutiny about the changes to the planning portal and the explanation. There was also an email sent out to all members in April towards explaining the changes. I have to say, not one member of council approached me or emailed me about the proposed changes. It was, like I said, it was also mentioned at scrutiny. Yes, the plans panels chairs were all consulted and the decision wasn't made until we consulted. And then the previous leader of the Conservative group was consulted as well. We did everything. It's not a statutory requirement of the council. Many other local authorities have never it's not that people can't make comments, it's just that many other local authorities have never made individual comments made by residents public to other residents. We and many other local authorities are also, and planning authorities are also changing the way we have due to the same problems that we've experienced as well with this. people will always be able to make comments. They will all be recorded in the reports of any planning application, and those reports will be made known to the planning panels as normal.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden.
May I just follow up, Chair? And I know Councillor Hayden well enough to know that everything she just said will have been made in absolute good faith. I'm not convinced it was entirely accurate, but I appreciate I've also put her on the spot. Could you confirm all those things you've just said in writing with dates and times? Because my understanding is the previous leader of the opposition wasn't briefed. I wasn't aware it had been to scrutiny. It certainly didn't go to development plans panel. So I'd be grateful if you could set out the timeline of who was engaged with and when, please.
Yes, of course. I mean, scrutiny is a matter of public record anyway, but I'm happy to get those. You're right, it didn't go to development plans panel, which is why I didn't mention it, but it was definitely the chief officer talked about it at scrutiny, and the scrutiny board did look at it.
Thank you. Tom, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment, because it is actually relevant to this report in the sense of workload and pressure on reduced numbers in teams is one of our biggest, if not the biggest challenge we've got at the moment. And after a period during the pandemic and then afterwards where people are sort of running to stand still really in a lot of areas. And this is an area of the organisation where I think that pressure is felt considerably, and what this change will do, even though, as Councillor Hayden said, it's not one that we would, if we had more resources, we wouldn't make this change. It is an area where it will mean that our scarce resources are diverted onto the work of making the planning applications move through the system as quickly as they can, with the right quality of scrutiny and intervention that can take place. And so I think it is something that, although it's a sort of one of those reluctant things that we've done, I think it is done in good faith and done with that in mind. I also would support Councillor Hayden's point about the online, the way that some behaviour has slipped into very personalised comments about officers and other residents at times, which is something we then, as the responsible authority that holds that website, has to take responsibility for. So it is an area of the way we work generally and the way we interact with the public that I think is probably worth further discussion with members and others, not just in this area but more generally, because we want to try and engender openness and transparency, but with respect and with the right, without the levels of abuse and other things that have happened, in isolated circumstances, but nevertheless importantly.
You, Tom. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you. Sorry, just on the back, I hope, Tom, you would accept that when opposition parties and members are saying they feel, and people in the community feel this was done to them, not with them, that we'd accept that we haven't, even if you think it's the right thing to do, actually there'd have been a lot of value, it would have landed better, and I think we could have achieved the outcome that you're articulating in a different way. And as a point of principle, I would say we will always be constructive when things are brought to us. I'd prefer not to have to make a song and dance and find a way to wedge it into the exec board. It should have been brought to us, and we should have had a discussion. It should have been to DPP, and I think I accept the issues that are there, but I would hope going forward that people will take my concerns on board, and the offer we will work constructively to try and help you resolve the issues that are there. But there's a way of doing it, and I don't think this has been the right way, and I hope people will reflect on that.
Councillor Hayden, please.
I'm really sorry, Leader. I forgot to mention that it's a 6-month trial, that this isn't set in stone. And I have asked, and I personally asked Councillor Marshall Katung for scrutiny to go back and when when the 6 months trial is over, to review it to see whether it's something that we should carry on with or not. So it will go through this 6 months trial will go through scrutiny as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Could I turn to the recommendations on the report that we started on for item 11, please? And I take it that you've noted the comments that have been made, and I take it the board is happy with the recommendations in the report. Thank you. And we'll turn to Councillor Cooper's papers, please, in item 12.
Thank you, Leader. And the first item of mine today for Executive Board is the outturn of the financial position of the authority for last year. And I'd like to start this item by thanking Victoria and her team for the fantastic work that they have undertaken this year in terms of the work on the budget. And I know it's been extremely challenging with the financial envelope that we have had to work within due to the government funding cuts that we've had to suffer as a local authority. And this year has been the hardest, I think, that I have ever experienced. And I know it's been extremely challenging for Victoria and the team to try and make sure that everything has been done within that financial envelope. So thank you, Victoria, and please pass on Executive Board's thanks to all the people who you work with to ensure that the council stays within a good financial position. So the report before us today is, as I've said, the financial health monitoring outturn for the year, so the full year's position. The report does note that we've got an overspend of 12.4 million, which is a reduction of 3.9 million when we looked at month 11's position that came to April's Executive Board. The report does go into real detail in terms of each of the directorates and where that overspend occurs. And so I won't go in depth about that in my introductory remarks. What I would say is that that overspend is recommended that we address it using a strategic contingency reserve balances that we have. I think just a few things to note really is some of the reasons that the budget has been extremely challenging is due to the financial position that the country finds itself in. So the inflationary pressures that we have been working under, we budgeted at the beginning of the year a 5% to work on a 5% inflationary rate, and we've seen inflation reach double figures within the year itself. We've also had the issue of the energy costs increasing to the local authority as well, which has had a huge impact on the in-year budget as well, and also with the fuel. As Executive Board has previously approved that the Merion House receipt could be used, brought into use this year, that's to the strategic reserve. It will hopefully cover what we need it to cover within the year. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to cover them from Exec Board members. I'll leave it there for now, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report and the introduction. I think obviously it's a concern, but as someone trying to run a business in challenging times, I understand only too well the impact of cost pressures, and I think this is the very definition of a rainy day. So dipping into the rainy day fund at this point seems like a sensible approach. Just a couple of areas I'd like to focus on. I'll come on to children's services in a second, but I was wondering if Councillor Lennox could just update us on what her plan is to deal with the HRA overspend and bring that under control and into balance.
Councillor Lennox, please.
Thank you. As Councillor Lamb knows, this is my first executive board in post as well, so I will try and give you an update as to what I've been discussing with the service so far. Various measures are being discussed around in-year measures to take the HRA overspend under control. Those are still being discussed with nothing agreed, and at this stage I'm not able to give any updates because it's still being consulted upon with myself as the executive member. But I will write to you as soon as we have any further information about those measures, but they are underway.
If I can just answer that, the HRA reserves will be used to balance the last year's figure from the HRA as well.
Thank you. And then can we just get an update on children and families? And obviously that's where a big portion of the challenge is coming from. Perfectly understand that a large proportion of that is around service demands, pressures related to cost of living, etc. But I'd just like some assurances that that is not just an excuse not to then look at the director as a whole and to look at where we can make efficiencies, and because it's not the first time we've not managed to keep the children's services budget under control. I'm well aware of a lot of the work that's going on, but I think it's helpful to get an update to this board.
Victoria, please.
Thank you, Chair. As we've seen over the especially over the last 12 months, we've seen significant increases in the children looked after in both education, health and care plans. This is a national issue, and we started recognising this in the summer last year when we were seeing the numbers increasing significantly. But on the education and health and care plans, we have seen nearly a 2.5-fold increase on where we were in 2016. So our numbers are significant. But as I've said, this is a national issue. Myself and Julie as Director of Children's are working really closely with other members across the directorates. There is an improvement board that we've put together in a task and finish group where we've got a number of work streams that are underway. However, this is a really challenging time because we are seeing an increase in the number of looked after children that we are looking after as a council, and the costs of where we're actually having to place those children is challenging. But an update report will be coming to executive board in July. But I would say that we are working across all directorates with the service to look at how we manage the position and what we can do to stay within the resources that we've got available.
Thank you, Victoria. Julie, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, I'd just really like to reiterate what Victoria has said in terms of this being a national issue. So I'm meeting regularly with directors of children's services right across the country, you know, in terms of core cities, Yorkshire and Humberside. And actually, you know, all of those are being challenged at the moment with the increased demand for placements, the increased cost of placements. As Victoria has said, a demand in terms of children requiring an education, health and care plan has actually risen by 118% since 2016. So I think it's something that is, you know, certainly acknowledged as a national, you know, a national issue in terms of really a broken system. However, having said that, you know, again, I just want to assure you, Councillor Lamb, that we are doing everything that we possibly can. And I think it's, you know, it's about looking at the strategic plans. You know, we really are working differently. I think we've got a different approach in terms of cross-directorate working, in terms of the delivery board, which reflects the expertise that we've got across the range of directorates within the council. But actually, it comes down as well to the Leeds pound. You know, so when we're thinking about, you know, all of those decisions being made by practitioners at an individual level, you know, really applying, you know, the principles of the local authority in terms of that Leeds pound is just as important as it is around us looking at the, you know, the strategic work that Victoria's just outlined. But there's an absolute commitment, you know, within the directorate to do everything that we possibly can.
Thank you. Tom, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's right that it's flagged as a major issue for us, and just to support everything that's been said in terms of the challenge that's in the system and the focus that we have on this, not just within children's, but I think corporately it's going to be, I think it's going to be a recurring issue throughout this year. I expect us to be talking about this at Executive Board each time, as virtually every council will be, I would say, from my straw poll recently of my colleagues. It's not just DCSs, it's chief executives and leaders who are recognising this challenge in the system. So there is a national dialogue that's open with ministers and in DFE and the Treasury, actually, I think, and civil servants about. I think there is a recognition that there is a challenge in terms of demand on send and looked after. The issue is how big is that, and how much of it is just due to variation throughout the country rather than an inherent problem in the system. And I think the Treasury maybe used to think that it was about variation. I think we might just be about convincing them now. But there is active work going on. We've had teams come up from London in the Treasury and in DLUC to look at what we're doing to try and understand more about these issues. But it is about that demand in the system, and it's, if you like, the other side of the coin of where this meeting started, with all those individual cases and the decisions that are taken about those children to keep them safe. There is a financial cost to those decisions at times, and that feeds through cumulatively when you get into a situation where the demand pressures are such, with COVID, with the cost of living, with the workforce pressures that we and others have, where that feeds through, and that's what we're seeing here. But we're absolutely focused on it, and it's right that it's been raised.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, please.
Yeah, just to sum up on this item, thank you, Councillor Lamb, for raising your questions and challenge as ever, quite rightly. But I hope that you've been given some reassurance about the work that we're undertaking in the authority to highlight it where it needs to be nationally, as you've heard. But also to deal with some of the overspends that we have faced and maybe will face next year within our authority as well. So the working group that's come together that both Victoria and Julie talked about, have made some really significant benefits already. I dread to think the position we might be in if they hadn't have already been working and identifying savings where they are possible, and will continue to do that as we go forward, whilst still, of course, working with our neighbouring authorities who are also experiencing the same level of demand and difficulty with their finances in their children's services departments, as well as in nationally as well. But thank you very much for your questions on that, as ever relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll move to the recommendations on page 190, and I see the board accept those recommendations. So move on to item 13, please, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. And the next item, again, is the Treasury Management outturn for last year. So just to briefly summarise, the net debt of the council is reported in the papers as £5 million lower than the February forecast due to revenue balances decreasing, and the assumed Treasury borrowing of 12 million for the capital programme. The level of debt has remained within the authorised limit and the operational boundary as approved by the council. And I'm pleased to say that the average rate of interest paid on the council's external debt has gone down as well slightly from last year, and it's been 3.22%. Again, due to some of the excellent work undertaken in the financial department at getting the right rates of interest at the right time on some of our borrowing. And again, the remainder of the Marine House capital receipt will be used to ensure our borrowing is much lower. Thanks,
Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you. Very briefly, I'd be the first to criticise, as you'd expect. So it seems only fair to say when I think actually you're getting it right. And I think the officers have done a remarkable job on the interest rate being achieved in particular. I think it'll be a challenge to keep it at that. But in fairness, so you don't shout me down too much when I'm being critical, I will stick my hand up and say credit where it's due, and a job well done.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. And I'll turn to the recommendations on page 258. I take it the board are happy with those. So I move on to item 14, please, Councillor Cooper, which is the gambling harms reduction.
Catch up with my papers. Sorry, Leader, just trying to catch up with my papers on my laptop. So this paper has come to me as the portfolio holder for licensing, but it actually is a shared paper between many other areas within the local authority and partners as well. So I'd like to start out by thanking Councillor Harland and the communities portfolio for the work that that's been undertaken in your portfolio area for the financial inclusion team, and the work that that they have undertaken over many years, I have to say, in respects of reducing the harm that's caused by gambling. So luckily I know quite a bit about it because it used to be my portfolio area from Councillor Harland, so I'm happy to speak about it. And it shouldn't go without noting that I want to pass on my thanks at this time to Councillor Barry Anderson, who was the former chair of the Environment and Housing Scrutiny Board, who undertook this scrutiny board work actually, and the report that's gone into it. And I have to say, like many others before it, that Councillor Anderson's work on that scrutiny board, I think that we are indebted to a lot of the work that's been undertaken in that scrutiny board at this executive board. I've worked with him for many years as an executive board member, and he's always come forward with extremely good reports. He checks, he challenges without shadow of a doubt, but the work that is undertaken within that board has been, really excellent work. So I want to make sure that we know our thanks from executive board to him today for his previous work, and particularly on this report that I know he had a lot of input to. So the report has a number of recommendations for the executive board in response to the scrutiny board's statement and recommendations. And I've got to say, I remember attending the first Gambling Harms conference that we had, and I'm looking at James Rogers over there as well, because he was and still is the director over that area, and attended the conference with me. And then again, when we launched the NHS Northern Gambling Clinic, and we were the first city in the country to do that. I think we've achieved some fantastic partnership work. We've achieved some really brilliant goals in the city that has been able to address the harm caused through gambling. I think I really want to highlight the council's work addressing that gambling harm. So thanks, Mary and the team. Thank you also to Public Health and the work that they've undertaken as well in this this arena. But I do have to say that our capacity to deal with this is very limited, and much more of the work that we know is needed is on a national level. So our influence, we have shown, we've demonstrated that where we can work well, we've done that, and we've proved that with the conferences that we've had, with the work that's done in the clinic as well. But I have to say, a lot of the discussions and from scrutiny board were around how the national legislation lets us down, and that it's the national legislation that needs to be looked at and lobbied about. And indeed, scrutiny agreed about the lobbying of government around that. The national legislation on this issue, because we're falling behind, and the problem is we're falling behind. People suffer, and we do know from the work that we've undertaken, again with some of our partners, the university and their survey that and the work that they did as well. We do know that those who suffer from gambling harm, gambling related harm, actually suffer from the worst inequalities as well than other groups of people do. So I'm really pleased to be able to present the report to Executive Board today and to show the great work that's gone on in this city in terms of the work that's been needed, and again that we're leading the way on this, and support all the recommendations that have been made and the conversations that and the work that scrutiny have done and that will continue to carry out all of that work going forward as well. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you, Chair. Is the new scrutiny chair here to answer questions, or not here? Because I know Councillor Anderson would have been if he was still the chair, but no, he's not. Okay, well, yeah, it's a shame because I'm certain Councillor Anderson, was he still the chair, would have been here to take questions, and I would echo the sentiments you expressed. If I know Barry, he's either currently on a golf course or tuning in. So if he's tuning in, I don't want him to get too big-headed, but you're absolutely right. And he's done an excellent job. And I think this paper highlights the value and importance of scrutiny. And I'm pleased. I think we might have some disagreement about the makeup of the scrutiny chairs, but the fact that we're still committed to opposition chairmanship of scrutiny is really important. Coming to the paper itself, I think the first point I wanted to make is it's really important that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We recognise that there's a real problem here that needs addressing. 300,000 problem gamblers in the UK is a big issue, but that's 0.5%. And that means 99.5% of people that are enjoying a flutter, they're contributing greatly to the economy. It's a significant industry in the city and the country. And so we have to get the balance right. So I think the report is really valuable, as the recommendations were well served in Leeds for levels of support. I think the point of principle I'd put forward, I hope others would, is there should be much more support for problem gamblers. It shouldn't be for the taxpayer to fund it. It should be for the gambling industry to fund it. And there's enough resource there. And I think that's something we probably all agree on, that should be the principle going forwards, that you get the support in place. Don't bring down an important industry because but the onus needs to be on the industry to step up and put the money in to make sure those services are there to support people.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Councillor Hallam, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, just to echo what Councillor Cooper said, and totally agree, Councillor Lamb. I know that as a former chair of licensing, a former chair of scrutiny, that's the word, and also being a member of Councillor Anderson's scrutiny board for a number of years. The work that has gone into this across those working groups and things has been immense. But as you say, you know, the gambling industry have got a huge part to play in this. My husband's a gambler, only likes a flutter on the horses, and I'm looking at a gentleman opposite that also likes a flutter on the horses. And you're absolutely right. The gambling industry takes advantage of some of these people, which is absolutely abhorrent when you see the adverts that go on through and target people putting money into the bank accounts and giving them discounts for this, and, you know, rides in posh cars and this, that and the other. It's a whole industry that needs looking at, and it needs to be looked at quickly. But you're right, it is an industry that contributes an awful lot to the economy, and it's getting that balance right.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, please.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for everyone's comments on this. And I think I have to say that the problem that we seem to have is the kind of the way the gambling industry has grown over recent years with online gambling, and people can access it on their smartphones. It's within their homes that, before you used to have to go to the bookies, if you wanted to put a bet on the horses. Now you don't have to move from your chair where you're sitting, do you, to be able to spend huge amounts of money, which is okay if you don't have a problem with gambling and it's not causing any harm. I have to say that's absolutely fine for that to happen. But I do think that's why I raised the point about legislation being so outdated, and that's why the legislation really needs looking at in terms of the online field and how people now undertake that gambling as opposed to how they used to. The legislation currently doesn't even consider the online gambling. So, I think that's why we desperately need it, and that's why we need to lobby government on that. I think you're quite right to point out that the industry itself needs to take some responsibility here as well. And I think also the Gambling Commission needs to be involved in a lot of this work as well, and should be funding quite some significant work being undertaken to reduce that harm to those number of people that you mentioned earlier as well, all of which I feel assured that we'll be continuing to do in this city on behalf of everybody concerned. But thank you.
Thank you. I turn to the recommendations on page 271 and see the board's happy with those. So if we could move on to Councillor Harlan's papers, please. Item 15.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an update on the last locality working report to Exec Board that was back in March of last year. We've had several new developments since then, including the youth service move to the Safer and Stronger Communities team, setting up new priority ward delivery group with representation at head of service and chief officer level, and starting to develop the priority ward partnership plans through local ward workshops in those wards. These are being progressed now that the workshops have all been delivered, and the workshops involve many of our third sector partners, local community groups, as well as officers from across the council directorates and stakeholders such as the police and the West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service. There are several helpful informative appendices setting out some of these developments in more detail. Appendix 1 details the great examples of locality working the team have carried out with those partners across the priority wards. And while we do carry out more intensive programme of work within those most deprived wards, there are great examples of locality working across the entire city. We're keen that what we learn from joining up partners and services in our priority wards, we can use to improve services throughout the city. And this will be a key concern for us going forward. The paper also asks for support for the review of the community committees, including developing the role of champions and subgroups. It sets out that all 99 councillors will be invited to take part in workshops, and the recommendations will go to the Communities, Environment and Housing Scrutiny Board. This was first agreed when Councillor Anderson was still chair. I look forward to discussing how we can better support our communities through these committees with colleagues across the city and the political divide. Also referenced in the report is the forthcoming Community Centres review, which ward members will also be asked to consult and comment on. Appendix 2 details the development of community committees with a focus on engagement with communities, including the successes of our youth summits and the Youth Activity Fund consultation, and the need to work with chairs to improve engagement with residents. Finally, Appendix 4 shows the Social Progress Index for all wards between 2018 and 20, with most wards seeing year-on-year improvement. I think it's appropriate that this update comes at the same time as Councillor Venner's paper on child poverty. Locality working has made some real improvements in our neighbourhoods since 2017, but we recognise that there's still much to do. Working alongside those partners, the invaluable partners such as the third sector, local community groups. It's vital that we not only listen to our communities, but that we ensure that we are heard and they are heard. And as it says in the paper, locality working across the city needs to be led by the views and aspirations of our residents and citizens. I have to absolutely agree with Councillor Venner that national policy does impact on poverty, but we are doing in Leeds what we can to improve the lives of those residents living in these neighbourhoods. And I too am open to listen to colleagues across other parties via scrutiny and otherwise to improve that even further. Finally, I too would like to make reference to and thank Councillor Barry Anderson for his support as the previous scrutiny chair and his past board's role as critical friend since 2017 and throughout this work, and look forward to working with the new scrutiny board going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harland. Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points on the report. The social progress index, I really like. I think that's a really powerful addition to the toolbox that we've got. So I welcome that. I think this is about locality working in priority wards. It's absolutely right that we focus resources and effort on the areas where the concentration of deprivation and poverty are the most, the question won't surprise you, or the comment that it's crucial that we don't ignore that there are pockets of deprivation in every part of the city, and in a lot of cases it's a lot harder for people in those circumstances because they don't have concentrated resource and support, and we've got to make sure that we find ways. Actually, I think the review of community committees is an opportunity, and what I hope you could tell us is you're open to looking at delegating further responsibilities to community committees and doing more locally, because I think actually the more we can make decisions as close to people that they affect as possible, the better. And so that's something I hope there's an opportunity to do through this review.
I can absolutely assure you that there's nothing off the table. We are hoping to be involved with as many members across the political divide. We hope as many of the 99 that are invited do attend and come along. It's vital that we get this right. On the back of the peer review that we had, the LGA peer review, we really need to drive this forward. And you're right, there are pockets of deprivation. Councillor Lyons used to call Kipperton Methley Ward the land of milk and honey, but I can assure you we do have our own pockets of deprivation. I don't know if Liz or Paul wants to come in and say anything further.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Harland. Paul Money, Chief Officer in the Safer Stronger Communities team. I think all I could really do, Councillor Lamb, is just echo what's been said there in terms of our intention in terms of supporting this review and indeed some of the other work that's alluded to in the paper. We would do that in as open and as transparent and as an engaging way as we possibly can, recognising that there's a lot of feedback, knowledge and expertise that we need to pick up in terms of taking this review forward. So that will be my assurance at this point.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn to the recommendations on page 299 and see the board are happy with those recommendations. So we move on to the last item of the day. Councillor Hayden, please, and item 16.
Thank you, Leader. This is the paper regarding the Transpennine route upgrade, Transport and Works Act order. So this follows on from the integrated rail plan for the North and Midlands, which was published in November 2021, which I'm not going to go into, but it did include the only thing it included was the Transpennine route upgrade. So since then, work has been going on to improve railway improvements between Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds and York. So many of the works in the Leeds boundaries will take place within the railway owned land using Network Rail's permitted development rights. For example, the station, fully accessible station at Morley replacing the old one. All these works were done within the railway boundary. However, there are several elements that fall outside the railway boundary, and hence the need for this report and our response to it. In order to deliver the elements of the scheme outside the railway boundary, Network Rail are submitting a Transport and Works Act order to the Secretary of State for Transport to seek permission to construct components of the Transpennine route upgrade east of Leeds, which extends from Kirkgate, which to all of us, well, certainly for me, is in the centre of Leeds, to Micklefield, which is in the land of milk and honey. So to the east of Leeds, Kirkgate run through to Micklefield, several Transpennine route upgrade works have been put forward by Network Rail, including the closure of 5 level crossings and work to 12 bridges. So 12 bridges will be impacted in different ways, and electrification and associated cabinets throughout. Within the Leeds boundaries, the works include electrification of the existing railway line. There are no new tracks proposed within the Leeds boundaries. And this order enables Network Rail to compulsorily acquire land and to take responsibility for a number of highways and planning powers. So I present the paper. It's quite a technical paper, and consultation has happened from Network Rail with various councillors in the wards affected over the last few months. So I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be glad to answer one quick question. It is a very technical paper. There's going to be a lot of disruption as a result of this. The question, and for a long period of time, the question is around how we can ensure this is mitigated, communicated effectively, and that we've considered the knock-ons to various routes and various communities, because there's a habit with these things. I know it's Network Rail doing the consultation. They'll consult with the communities that it's going to go through, but there'll be lots of roads that are suddenly going to be in other areas, and have they been consulted and involved and engaged as well?
Thank you. Martin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the answer, Councillor Lamb, is in relation to where we get to with this consultation process that we're proposing in terms of our response. But yes, fully supportive of the principle of TRU, and it's the largest infrastructure project in the north of England at the moment. But there are, in terms of the powers that are being sought, in our view, it would lead to impact on the highway, how the works are done, impact on the amount of influence that we would have as a planning authority. So with the approval of Executive Board today, that would lead to the letter that's in the appendix being sent to Network Rail. And through that process, we would hope for some movement, which would give us more control over the issues that you're talking about in terms of impact on residents, highway works, etc. Subject to the outcome of that, we can then take a view as to whether we wish to push any of those minor technical points further at a public inquiry. And ultimately, when the TWAO is finally granted, we will then be in a position to look in detail and work closely with Network Rail in terms of the consultation on the final proposals that are approved, with a view to working closely with Network Rail to make sure that the public know about the level of impact that will occur.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn to the recommendations. Just before that, I'll say, as a ward member for Micklefield, certainly recommend certainly support the council as we're in the middle of the Ashes going into bat for us in terms of where Network Rail want to close a level crossing and sever a public right of way, asking for a bridge, asking for a bridge there. There's a lot of housing and potentially industrial commercial development in that area. And we think that that should be taken into account rather than a pedestrian count on things that have happened in the past. So with that, I shall turn to the recommendations on page 355, and I take it the board are happy with those. That's great. And at that point, I'll close the meeting. Thank you, everybody.